Read with me beginning in verse 39 of the text. The Bible says, one of the criminals who were hanged railed at him, saying, "Are you not the Christ? Are you not the Messiah? Save yourself and us." But the other rebuked him, saying, "Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation, and we indeed justly? For we are receiving the due reward of our deeds. But this man has done nothing wrong." And he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus said to him, "Truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise." We know the Bible says as Jesus was crucified, two criminals were crucified with him, one on his right and one on his left. One of them mocked him, scorned him, ridiculed him, rejected him, all the way to the end. If you're really the Christ, if you're really the Messiah, save yourself and us. He sneered at him until he died. But the Bible says the other criminal, just as guilty as the first, experienced something different. One thing he experienced was the fear of God. Verse 40 says he asked, "Do you not fear God?" He began to see God at work in what was happening. He saw the majesty of God in Jesus. He asked, "Do you not fear God?" He saw who God was. He also saw who he was. He says, we're dying justly. We're condemned justly. We're dying on these crosses because we committed crimes. He saw what he had done, but he also saw who Jesus was. He said, this man has done nothing wrong. And so he turned to Jesus and simply prayed, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." Man, that's a simple prayer. That's really all you have to do is acknowledge your sin before Jesus, acknowledge that he can save you, and simply say, "Jesus, remember me." Think about what that criminal didn't do. He didn't say, "Jesus, from now on, I'm going to live a lot better life." He was nailed to a cross. He didn't say, "Jesus, from now on, I'm going to turn over a new leaf and treat everybody better." He couldn't do anything but die. That's all he could do. All he could do was die and ask Jesus to forgive him of his sin. "Jesus, forgive me. Remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus said to him, "Truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise." I've circled that word paradise in my Bible in verse 43. It's a word from the Persian language that literally means a garden. Paradise, it's the same word that's used in the Old Testament to describe the Garden of Eden, a place of forever, a place of forever peace, a place of forever joy, a place forever in the presence of God. Jesus told the dying thief, "Truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise." And he was saying, you will be with me forever. I want you to hear me say this. The cross is a place of forever. What you do with the cross determines your forever. If you reject Jesus, you'll spend forever separated from God in a place called hell. If you receive Jesus, you'll spend forever with Jesus in paradise. I read a story about a pastor in Philadelphia, and one day he was working in his study sort of by himself, and someone came to visit him. And this man had traveled a long way to visit this pastor. He had never met the pastor before, but the pastor brought him into his study, and just because he knew this man had traveled a long way, the pastor got right down to business. He said, "Sir, have you been saved?" And the man said, "Well, that's why I've come here. I've come here because I've heard you preach and I've heard you talk about being saved, and I really don't know why I need to be saved." And the pastor took a pen and took some paper, and he drew something like this, and he put it in front of the man. 3 crosses. And under one cross, if you can see it, one cross he wrote, "In and on." On this cross he wrote, "In but not on." And on the center cross he wrote, "On, not in." 3 crosses. And he asked the man, he said, "What do you think these 3 crosses represent?" The man said, "Well, I guess they represent Jesus, who died on the center cross, and then the 2 thieves who died on the cross on either side of him." He said, "That's right." The pastor asked him, "Sir, what do you think this cross means, the one that says in and on. And the man said, well, I really don't know. The pastor said, well, here's what I mean. It means that this man had sin in him and on him. He had sin in him. That means he had sinned. The Bible says we've all sinned. We all have sin in us. But he also had sin on him. That means he had the penalty and the punishment of eternity in hell on him because of his sin. Sin was in him. Sin was on him. He said, look at this cross. What do you think this cross means? And the man looked and he said, well, I guess it means that criminal had sin in him, but the penalty of sin was not on him. He said, I guess that was the criminal who asked for Jesus to remember him when he came into his kingdom. And the pastor said, that's right. He had sin in him. He was still a sinner, but the penalty for his sin was not on him. He said, now look at the middle cross. That represents Jesus. And Jesus had sin on him, but not in him. There was no sin in him. Jesus never sinned. But when he died, all of our sin was placed on him. All of our sin was placed on Jesus. He paid the price for this man's sin. He paid the price for every person's sin who believes on him. He said, so I want to ask you, sir. He said, of these two crosses, of these two men, he said, which one are you? And the man began to weep, and he said, well, this man. He said, I'm this man. I've got sin in me, and I know I've got the penalty for sin on me. I know I need to be saved. And that day, that man prayed and asked Jesus Christ to take his sin from him. And by the cross where Jesus died, that he would place all of his sin on Jesus and receive God's gift of forgiveness. It's just that simple. You come to Jesus in your sin. You come to Jesus with the penalty for sin. The Bible says the wages of sin is what? Death. And that's not just physical death. That's eternal spiritual death and separation from God. We come to Jesus in our sin and with the penalty of eternal, forever death and judgment because of our sin. But when we place our sin on Jesus, he saves us and makes us right with God. There's some of you who are here today, and more than anything else today, you need to give your sin to Jesus. He died for your sin on the cross. And today, if you'll come to him and just turn from your sin and say, Jesus, save me. A simple prayer. Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Jesus said to him, today, truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise. We see the cross and forever